Your last Pulitzer Prize, you won it for investigating Donald Trump's finances in detail and looking at where he got his money and sort of what did you find and what were your conclusions from that research?
Yeah, we found two primary things. First, Donald Trump has always said that he is a self-made billionaire who only got a very small loan from his father of about $1 million and then turned that into this vast empire. What we discovered is that, in fact, he actually received at least $413 million from his father, not $1 million. And then the second thing that we found was that one of the reasons why his father was able to be so generous is because he and his son, Donald, and other members of the family committed a series of tax evasions that enabled them to avoid giving money to the government and instead funneling it to Donald Trump and his siblings. Those are the two primary findings.
That's quite incredible. So Donald Trump received $413 million at least, rather than $1 million from his father.
Correct.
How rich is he now? Where did all of that money go? He says he's really, really rich, and he makes a point of that. How rich is he really?
So nobody actually really knows the answer to that question. He claims that he's worth at least $10 billion. There's nobody who's looked at his holdings who comes anywhere near that figure. And what we discovered in the course of our reporting is that Mr. Trump, throughout his life, has vastly exaggerated his wealth. So, for example, back in the 1970s, he was claiming that he was worth at least $200 million, when in fact his tax returns showed that he made less than $100,000.
That's quite a difference. But so there's no estimates, no realistic or serious estimates as to how much he's actually worth right now?
So one of the problems with us being able to make a realistic estimate is that Donald Trump, unlike every other president over the last 40 years, has refused to release any of his recent tax returns. And so because we don't have access to his tax returns, it's very difficult to make an accurate accounting of what his wealth actually is.
That was going to be my next question. It must be incredibly hard to get sources when you don't have access to any tax returns. So how did you go about your research? Where did you get your information from, as far as obviously you can say?
So this is a reason why this story took myself and two colleagues 18 months of work to piece it all together, is because there's no easy way to get the information, but ultimately through a lot of shoe leather reporting and hard work, we were able to assemble over 100,000 pages of financial documents that enabled us to really put the puzzle pieces together over months and months and months of work. Those documents also included over 200 tax returns, unfortunately not from Donald Trump, but from his family businesses and from his father. And those documents, along with bank records and financial audits, allowed us for the first time to actually track the money that flowed day by day, year by year, from Fred Trump to his son Donald Trump. So, for example, by the time Donald Trump was 3 years old, he was being paid $200,000 a year from his father's empire. By the time he was 8, he was a millionaire. By the time he was 17, he owned a 52-unit apartment building in New York. By the time he graduated from college, his father was paying him about $1 million a year. And this continued really throughout Donald Trump's growing up and well into his adult life.
So this entire self-made billionaire story is quite clearly a myth. Did you manage to scrape all of those documents together? Was there anything that you could get from official records, or was it all sources that came to whistleblowers and sources and that you can't talk about, obviously?
So it was a combination of both.
Okay. It's really interesting for me to see. Why are the president's finances and personal taxes so important in the US? Because in Austria, no one asks for the president's tax returns or the chancellor's tax returns. It's just not something that comes up. Why is that such an important thing in US politics?
Well, it's seen as an important accountability mechanism. You need to, and it's one that senior political figures and governmental officials are well used to abiding by, and it's important in order to see whether there are any conflicts of interest that are hidden from the public. It's important as a matter of keeping an eye out for potential corruption. So it's really seen as a kind of very ordinary measuring stick, if you will, in the United States. It's something, as I said before, every presidential candidate for the last 40 years has released tax returns as part of this process, except for him.
You've mentioned conflicts of interest. Based on your research, does it seem that Donald Trump has any currently?
Well, the story that we told really takes you through the life of Donald Trump up until around 2004, 2005.
And that's when the records sort of stopped.
And that's where we sort of stopped with this round of reporting. And so there's an enormous amount of interest, not just at the New York Times, but really throughout journalism in the United States, to really understand better what's happened in the last 15 years. And we don't really have much insight yet, or at least insight that we've been able to share with the public about what's happened in the last 15 years. So it's actually really hard to answer that question that you're asking. It's a very simple question, and obviously people are dying to know the answer, but we just don't yet have the body of evidence and the body of material that would allow us to answer that question.
It seems, though, you said it's a very important routine thing for candidates to release their tax returns. It's important for accountability, for transparency. And yet, from the outside, I get this impression that for Trump's core base, it doesn't really matter. They don't seem to care that much. Am I correct in that assumption?
I think you are correct that in his base, especially, they are not hungering to see his tax returns. The polls show consistently that most Americans are, but in terms of his base, no, they're not all that keen to pry that open. He makes the argument, listen, I was elected president and the whole world knew at that time that I wasn't releasing my tax returns. So really the election itself kind of decided the matter and we should just move on. That's his take on this.
But the polls do show that the majority of Americans do not agree with that, and they do want to see them.
So I haven't seen the very latest polls, but I know that there's been a substantial amount of polling that says most Americans think it's important for a president to be transparent.
I'd like to move away from Trump's taxes a little bit and talk about your work at the New York Times. So obviously, the NYT is probably the single news outlet that Donald Trump criticizes most harshly and picks on most frequently.
We have a lot of company.
That is true. He's very critical of media in general. What's the situation like in the U.S. generally? Have you felt any changes since he came into office, and have you felt any threats to press freedom? Any changes to your day-to-day work?
So I think everyone who does this kind of work in the United States, we all talk, and I think a lot of journalists are experiencing a significant increase in really ugly threats lodged at them personally, in some cases death threats, via emails and Twitter and
And
phone
this is
calls.
from his supporters, or from where do they come from?
You know, you don't ever fully take a polling on where this is coming from, but you know, yes, I think it's some, you know, substantial number. You can see it actually at the rallies that he holds. There's a sort of visceral anger that's directed at the reporters from the folks who are flocking to his political rallies. And it's unfortunately, it has resulted in bomb threats at some of the news organizations. The New York Times, not too long ago, was forced to put up big concrete blocks in front of our entrances because of our concerns about potential violence or threats. And so I think that there is a concern, especially about some of the anti-media rhetoric that flows every day out of the White House, and what that means for the idea of a free and independent press, which is really a cornerstone of American democracy. It's protected by the First Amendment in our Constitution, and yet I think we're feeling a lot of concern about where this rhetoric is taking us as a country.
What about, aside from these horrible threats and violent threats and these things, what about your sort of correspondence with the White House, attempts to get information from various official sources? Is it harder to get by? Is that sort of work harder? Has it become harder to do?
So they haven't had a press conference at the Pentagon for, I think, at least a year. They discontinued the White House press briefings. I don't know that there's been a White House press briefing for many, many months. And so, yeah, there's a concern about the ability to get information from the basic branches of government, the basic government offices. We've had some significant problems getting access to public records that we once were able to get access to fairly easily. And I think there's also, the president himself has said repeatedly that he would like to change libel laws in the United States to make it easier for him and others to sue journalists who displease them.
Do you think any of this, the tax matters, the financial matters, Trump's approach to the media, do you think any of this is going to affect his re-election chances? And ultimately, do you think he's going to be re-elected?
Gosh, I don't know. That's above my pay grade, whether he's going to be re-elected. I think that he clearly believes that beating up on the media is a political winner for him amongst his base. It has, of course, provoked a backlash from the other side. I mean, at the same time that we're getting more death threats, interestingly enough, we also get more people sort of coming up to us and saying thank you and please keep doing what you're doing. It's really important that we fight hard in this country to maintain a free and independent press. I don't think, I think there are a lot of people who are properly skeptical about journalism, and I understand it and I get it. I think it's really on us to work even harder, to do work that is fair and accurate, and is done honorably.
So you can't really say, you don't have a general feeling based on the mood that's currently going on in the U.S. whether or not we're going to get 4 more years of Trump or not.
No, I think that all of the people who made those kinds of predictions in 2016, most of them, you might want to learn a lesson from pretending that you know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
We just don't.
That makes sense. Thank you so much, David, for meeting with me.
You're welcome. Thank you.